What's going on, everyone? Bringing you a video today. It's going to be a little bit different from my previous videos about Michigan football and college football and stuff like that. Still dealing with sports, but it's something that dealing with the topic of fantasy football. Um, so, fantasy football is something that I've been doing for years now. Something that I enjoy doing. Something that, to be honest with you, something that got me more involved and more entrenched in actually watching NFL football. Which seems odd because, football is everything for a lot of people. But for me, don't get me wrong, I like football. I like the NFL football and all of that. But I was just more casual with it. But when you get into fantasy football, like really get into it, in order to get good and do well in it, you have to really get serious with it. And with doing that, it involves you being more involved with the actual watching of the game, looking at the stats, comparing stats, and things of that nature, and analyzing a whole lot. And because of that, it just made me love and appreciate the game of football more. So what I wanted to do was just bring you a video just giving you my different steps of what I do in order to do well in fantasy sports, period. It doesn't have to be football, because I've done fantasy basketball in one, fantasy football, in one, fantasy baseball. No, I think I won like maybe one league. Fantasy baseball is real hard. Haven't done hockey, but I just wanted to give you kind of my tips and my steps and stuff like that of what I do each year in order to do well, and what I do to give my fantasy teams the best opportunity to win. Now, also just to let you know, with fantasy sports, a lot of the time, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of skill involved, there's a lot of work that goes into it, if you really want to be serious and do well with it. But there is also a lot of luck that comes with it as well. I mean, I've had teams that I thought I just killed it in the draft. I thought I drafted well, and I didn't win, or the team was abysmal, and I sat there scratching my head like, what did I do wrong? And then I've had times where I thought my draft was terrible, and I ended up winning. Now, injuries do play a large role in this. I mean, there's times where you might be rolling and then key players in your team get injured. And I actually have a story about that I'll do after I give you the steps and all that. But you just have to be patient and consistent with that. That's one of the main keys to it. But anyways, let me start off by letting you know with step one. Step one for me, definitely one of the key things, and I'm doing this based off of if you're doing fantasy and you're doing a live draft of whether it's football or whatever. I'm basing this on doing a live draft. I've never done an auction draft before, so I'm not sure if the same things apply to this. But this is if you're doing an actual live draft. The first thing that's real important is make sure that you show up and actually go to your actual live draft and you don't miss it. Now, I know that sounds obvious, but sometimes you choose not to go, or you got other things you got to do that you might feel more important, or sometimes you just can't make it for whether it's work or previous obligations, and I understand that. I mean, in a case like that, you want to pre-rank your team, pre-rank the list ahead of time. But I'm going to tell you why. I mean, that's the best you can do, but that may not be the best option. But the reason why you want to show up, and also when you show up, make sure that when you show up to your draft before a time that you prepare yourself. I usually, before a draft, an hour before, then I'm kind of getting all my stuff together and getting myself in a state where I'm in full concentration mode, so that I'm not making mistakes or anything like that. And what I try to do is, the moment that the draft is open or the link says enter live draft, I'm going into the live draft, and I'll tell you why. The main reason why I want to get into the live draft right away is because I want to see what draft position I am. Now, as far as where you want to be in the draft, it really doesn't matter. I know people want to have the first pick, because if you get the first pick, you get to choose anyone that you want, and that's great. But there's downsides to it. I mean, if you get the first pick in the first round, well, now you got the last pick in the second round. So there's their pros and their cons and like that. Typically, I actually like to be somewhere in the middle so that I get good picks on each round. That's where I prefer to be. I hate having to wait a whole long time and then I pick two people back to back. Because that's pressure and stuff like that. I mean, if you're properly prepared, I guess it's fine, but I've never really liked picking first or last in a round. I like being in the middle. But yeah, once you get into the draft, you can see where you're drafting, and also I like to see how many people are actually, actually at the draft. I do Yahoo. They have it now where you can actually kind of guess and see who's actually at the draft, and that kind of lets you know who's going to be auto picking and who's going to be actually sitting there and making their own assumptions and making their own picks. Now, the reason why I don't necessarily like doing the auto draft and why I want to always be there is a lot of times those picks that you make, if they're gone, because not everyone picks in the order that whatever the platform they're using, whether it's ESPN or Yahoo or CBS or whatever it is, if you have it say where you got that pick, it could throw your whole auto pick out of line if someone grabs your pick out of the order that it's in, and you get stuck with someone that you didn't want. So that's why I like to get there and pick myself, because a lot of times you can pick out players that not necessarily should be where they are, and I'm going to get into that as well. So you basically always want to be there for your live draft. Now, before you actually do the live draft, my second tip is do your homework. And by that I mean you want to make sure that before you go into your draft, you have a game plan of the players that you want. You have a game plan of not only the players that you're focusing on, but an idea of you don't get this player or you don't get this player, at least the type of player that you want. Like, do you want to focus on getting a running back first? Do you want to focus on getting a wide receiver first? Or do you want a quarterback? These are all things that you want to game plan before the draft. Same thing if you're doing basketball. Do you want to focus in on getting your point guard? Do you want to focus on getting your two guard, or whatever the case may be? Different sports have different values and things. Like, I remember, I haven't done baseball in a while, but I remember one of the hardest positions to draft is getting a back catcher. I don't know if it's like that now, but there's only like maybe one or two good catchers, and then the rest are garbage. And I always had problems with starting pitching, so that was always a focus that I started to do, is try to get better pitching and kind of figure out the hitting later. But you always want to have a game plan. So with that game plan, you always want to, before you do your draft, just take about maybe an hour or two, or whatever the case may be, whether it's on the same day. I try to do it maybe a day before, and then an hour before the actual draft, go back and revisit what I've looked at so that I have an idea of what I'm looking for, and just try to see what you're looking for. One thing that I also do is I'll go and look at the stats and look And one of the key places that I go is actually on ESPN. They have a whole fantasy section for that. And one of the things that I usually look for is they got a page where it shows the average draft position, their rankings, and also the stats that they have from last year. Now, why are these important? Typically speaking, first of all, for the average draft position, this lets me know value of where these guys are going. A lot of times, like from year to year, things change. So, for example, one guy who is drafted in the first round last year, now all of a sudden he's drafted in the third round. And that's where he's going on average. Well, that lets me know where his value is. Because the one thing that you don't want to do is draft and you don't get the value for the pick. I mean, it's like that in real life, but definitely in fantasy, it can make or break your fantasy team. So you don't want to overshoot and draft too high for a guy that's not worth it. So I always try to see where the average draft position is so I can kind of count and see whether or not I should be drafting this certain player at this certain position. As far as the stats go, that's kind of, it depends, because that can be kind of misleading as well. Like, for example, if you have a player who was injured all last year, of course his stats are not going to be as high as someone that played a full schedule. So it kind of lets you know, in general, what type of stats they had and see how consistent they are, and you can kind of base it from that. And that's typically how I gain knowledge as far as that. And also with the rankings, it lets me know also that also goes into value of the players as well. Because sometimes, especially if I don't get the pick that I'm looking for, I may not know who they deem as being, next up on the list. And I don't want to base it off of, name alone and then find out that this guy's not worth it. So definitely have your stats and all that in front of you so that there's no issue as far as knowing where to draft. And then next, number 3 is, it coincides with what I do for number 2, and that's definitely try to deem the value of these players. And that's how I usually how I draft as far as I go. So for example, if I think I can get a steal, I'm definitely going to go for it. There's sometimes, and a lot of times, especially this last draft that I did a 14-team draft in the league, and I felt that I got a couple of steals late in the later rounds. And if you can get steals, especially a lot of times, rookies who are starting, definitely look out for that, because you can get great value on a player that nobody is even thinking about. Or you might, especially this goes back to the rankings, look out for players who may have been injured all of last year, or or they're suspended, like a Josh Gordon or whatever the case may be. You can get them in the later rounds, because a lot of times people forget about these players, and if you don't have these players in the queue, you're gonna miss out on them, and people can get a steal with them. Also, a lot of things that people don't think about are players who are either injured at the beginning of the season or suspended at the beginning of the season. Definitely look out for that, because a lot of times people will not even draft a player because they're injured, and to me that's crazy, because you may be able to get someone who's suspended or they're injured and get them in a later round, and then when they play, say they're injured for a couple of games or 3 or 4 games or whatever the case may be, you can get great value from them. Think of it this way: a lot of times during the season, your players may miss a game or miss 2 or 3 games through injury anyways. So they may only play 12, 13 games anyways. So how is that any different than someone who misses the first 2 or 3 games due to injury? So always keep that in mind. If you see a player that's injured but they're coming back from injury and they're not being drafted, take a chance on them because you may get great value for them. People may just skip on them, oh, they're hurt. But no, they're just injured, but they're going to come back and they're going to play a great role in your team. So definitely do that. Try to win your draft as much as possible. Now, once you do your draft, all is not lost as far as that goes. Last year, for the fantasy football league that I did, I actually missed a draft. Not because I didn't want to do it, but funny enough, I actually got the date wrong. I thought it was on a Sunday, like it usually was, but it was actually on a Saturday, and it completely threw me off. And I missed the draft completely. I didn't even preset my players because I thought I was going to be there for the live draft. So, once I did that, I was like, oh man, what am I going to do? I got to just sort this out. So one of the key things you got to do is definitely watch the waiver wire. Try to watch as much of the games as you can. Sometimes you can see and find out about hidden gems that no one has drafted or no one has talked about or whatever the case may be, rookies, which goes back to what I was saying before. I remember one draft a long, long time ago. I had watched the first game of the season, and I was watching the Cardinals play, and I remember Anquan Boldin was a rookie that year, and I remember just watching him and just being completely impressed with just his explosiveness, the way he was just driving to the ball, not catching it with his body, but catching it with his hands, his acceleration, and I said, I gotta go pick this guy up. And I remember he had over 100 and something receptions that year, and he was a huge part of my fantasy team. Didn't win though, but he was a monster. So definitely don't overreact on the first week. So for example, unless you see something in the person like I saw with Boldin, don't go to the waiver wire and just get some guy because he had one great game and he's a nobody. But if you see something in the person, like you actually watch the game and you think that this guy is really, really good, and it's not just he had a fluke game or they weren't covering him or whatever the case may be, definitely go out and get him, because the waiver wire is a key way to win. I remember last year for my fantasy football team, I won. And this is actually going to be another thing with step 4, or key point number 4, which is never give up in your fantasy league. Now last year, as I mentioned, I missed the draft. I went in, and with our league, it's more difficult because you actually had to draft offense and defensive players. So, I mean, I think I did a great job of picking up all the people who people didn't draft and stuff like that to get a playable, feasible team. And I remember the first week I won big, and then I was doing okay, and I was just trending at 500 for like the whole year. And I remember about halfway through the season, 1 week it said that I won, and then I came back a few days later, and then they adjusted my stats, and then it said I lost, and that really killed me. And then I think the week after that, my first round draft pick, Jamal Charles, went down with ACL tear, and I think I was right then and there. I was like, you know what, I'm done. I'm just gonna give up. And I remember sitting there that Sunday, and I wasn't even gonna bother to set my lineup. I was like, whatever, I don't even care anymore. And then I remember just sitting there, and I said, you know what? You gotta be crazy, man. Why are you giving up? You can win this. And I remember going back and setting my lineup, and I remember I barely got into the playoffs. And the only way I got into the playoffs is actually through a couple of pickups that I got, which were Darren McFadden for the Cowboys. And he actually had a monster season last year as far as fantasy goes. And who's the guy that I picked up? Boy, I forgot his name. It was the wide receiver on Seattle. I forgot his name. I don't know why I forgot his name, but I had picked him up, and he had a string for like the last 6 games where he was getting like 2-3 touchdowns a game, 100 yards. I'm kicking myself because I can't remember his name. I can see what he looks like. I just can't remember his name off the top of my head. But I picked up a few key guys here and there, and it carried me to just barely make the playoffs as the 8th seed. And, I was like, okay, well, I'm the 8th seed. I'm going against a guy that's number 1. He's been killing it the whole year. He's been blowing people out, And it was weird. Somehow or another, my team got hot at the end of the year, and I ended up being the number 1 seed, then beating the number 2 seed, and then, no, I beat the number 1 seed, I beat the number 3 seed, and then beat the number 2 seed to win the whole thing. And I was amazed because it was like, here I am, I didn't draft my team, I had to put them together. It was a makeshift team. It seemed like it was put together by duct tape and bubble gum. And I had key injuries. And I was ready to give up. And it just so happens that I was just sitting there one Sunday morning, and it just came to me, you know what? You don't need to give up. You need to just go ahead and play this thing all the way through. And lo and behold, I did that and I won. So if you're struggling with your fantasy team, obviously if your team is like 0-10 and it's week 11, I think you're not going to come back. But if you're still in the hunt, just try to make the playoffs. Once you make the playoffs, your team can get hot. This is the thing with fantasy football. Your team could be killing it the whole year. You're slaughtering people. And then you have 1 week where your team just stinks. Where your team, nobody does anything. Your quarterback throws like 5 interceptions. And you lose, especially in the playoffs. So just try to play it out all the way to the end. Try to make the playoffs and then just go from there. If you do that, you're definitely going to have a great opportunity to win. Like I said, and make sure that you're constantly looking in the free agents, and just see who's available, and definitely go from there. Try to also look for matchups as well. Like if you're going against a team and your quarterback is going against, like, say, the number 1 team in the NFL for defense, maybe you want to steer away from that. Definitely make sure you have a backup quarterback, and a decent one at that for stuff like that. But try to see matchups. If you see like a bad matchup, switch out your quarterback. I remember I always have a backup quarterback just for that. Again, I have that this year. Try to maximize your players. If you see a good matchup for your players, definitely make sure that you do plug them in. And just make sure you keep on top of your team. If you see any key injuries, make sure that Sunday morning you go and you look and see if any of your players are injured before the game. The worst thing you can do is have your player put up 0 points. So I always try to, whether it's bye weeks or injuries, just make sure that unless you just have no choice, like obviously, if you just don't have enough players, then you're gonna have to have empty slots. Like if you have all your players in one bye week, then there's nothing you can do about it. You can't drop your whole team. But whenever you can fill in a slot, make sure you fill in a slot. Make sure that you're not getting zeros. I can't count the amount of times that in 1 week I lost by like 1 or 2 points or by a decimal point, and I'm like, man, all I had to do was just play such and such player, and they would have just got 20 yards. I could have won. So whatever you do, make sure that you don't leave any empty slots. Try to avoid getting zeros, because it'll kill you in the end that you lose by 1 point or by half a point, and then that loss is what stops you from getting to the playoffs. So always make sure that you set your lineup. Make sure that your injuries are taken care of, your bye weeks are taken care of, and just set the best lineup you possibly can each week. Don't forget about it. Don't put it to the back burner. Make sure that you check out your lineup definitely in the middle of the week for any key pickups. Actually, no, for pickups that night that they play, look to see, because if you wait until the middle of the week, that player's gone. I'll tell you that right now. So if you see someone that you want to get, especially if they have a great performance on Sunday, that Sunday night, heck, even if he's a free agent in that week, not in that week, even if it's just during the game or after the game, go ahead and pick him up. If you can. If you can't, the moment that you can do it, go ahead and do it, because if you don't do it, someone is going to do it. Someone's going to grab that player, and you're going to be kicking yourself because you procrastinated and didn't get him. So definitely be cognizant of the waiver wire. Sometimes people overreact and drop players because they're stinking up the joint in the first week or the first couple of weeks. Don't overreact like them. Just kind of wait it out, and because just like your team can turn it around, players can turn it around. Sometimes players are injured and you don't know they're injured, or whatever the case may be. So if you see a player that someone has waived and you got top priority from the waiver wire, go ahead and pick him up. Don't wait, because someone else will grab him before you can. So anyways, that's all I have for now. If you have any comments or anything like that, definitely leave a comment. If you like the video, make sure to like and share the video. It really helps my channel grow. And if you continue to like my content that I'm delivering, make sure you hit the subscribe button and definitely subscribe to me. Anyways, thank you for watching, and have a great day.